Chapter 16. Walk in Plain. This cell was, strictly speaking, the arsenal and the locker room of the Nautilus. A dozen Scaphander devices, suspended from the wall, awaited the walkers. Ned Land, seeing them, manifested an obvious reluctance to dress. "But my brave Ned," I tell him, "the forests of the island of Crespo are only underwater forests." Good made the harpooner of the appointees, who saw his dreams of fresh meat faint. "And you, Mr. Aronnax, you will enter in these clothes. There it is necessary." "Well, Master Ned, free to you, mister," replied the harpooner, shrugging his shoulders. "But as for me, unless I am forced, I will never enter there." "Master, you will be forced," Ned said. Captain Nemo then asked for advice. "I am a gentleman wherever I go, sir," answered. Advice on a call from the captain. 2 men of the crew came to help us, to put on these heavy, waterproof clothes, made of seamless rubber, and prepared in such a way as to withstand considerable pressures. They say, an armor at the same time flexible and resistant. These clothes formed trousers and jackets. The trousers ended with thick shoes trimmed with heavy soles of lead. The fabric of the jacket was held by strips of copper, which baked the chest, defended it against the thrust of the water, and let the lungs run freely. Its sleeves ended up in the form of softened gloves, which did not in any way interfere with the movements of the hand. There was, far from it, it was seen to make perfected clothes such as the breeches liege, the supervestas, the clothes of the sea, and the chests which were invented, and which will be invented. 18th century Captain Nemo, one of his companions, sort of Hercules, who must have been of a prodigious strength, advice, and I soon put on his clothes of scapegoat. It was no more than our head in its metallic sphere. But before proceeding to this operation, I asked the captain permission to examine the rifles which were intended for us. One of the men of the Nautilus presented me with a simple rifle whose stick, made of sheet steel and hollowed inside, was of a fairly large size. It served as a reservoir for compressed air that a valve operated by a trigger let escape in the tube of metal. A projectile box, and emptied in the thickness of the stick, contained about 20 electric bullets, which, by means of a spring placed automatically in the gun, was ready for the other shot was fired. To leave Captain Nemo, I say, this weapon is perfect, and with an easy maneuver, I only ask to try it. But how are we going to reach the bottom of the sea at the moment, Mr. Professor? The Nautilus is stranded by 10 meters of water, and we have only to leave. But how will we get out? You will see. Captain Nemo introduced his head in the spherical cap council, and I do not care as much, not without having heard the Canadian launch, a good ironic hunt. The top of our clothing was finished by a tapped copper collar, on which screwed this metal helmet. 3 holes protected by thick print. Worms allowed to see in all directions just by turning the head inside this sphere. As soon as it was in place, the roll devices placed on our back began to work, and for my account I breathed from the suspended corp. I was ready to leave, but to be frank, imprisoned in his heavy clothes and nailed to the tillek by my lead soles, it would have been impossible for me to make a part. But this case was planned, because I felt that one pushed me in a small room contiguous to the locker room. My companions also followed me. I heard a door equipped with shutter closed on us, and a deep darkness enveloped us. After a few minutes, a sharp whistle reached my ear. I felt a certain impression of cold rise from my feet to my chest, obviously from the inside of the boat. We had, through a tap, given entry to the outside water that invaded us and of which this room was soon filled. A second door pierced in the flank of the Nautilus, then opened half a day, and we lit up a moment after our feet. How could I trace the impressions that left me, this walk under the UAE? Words are powerless to tell such wonders, when the brush itself is incompetent to render the particular effects to the liquid element, as how the pen would know how to reproduce them. Captain Nemo walked forward, and his companion followed us a few steps back. And advice and I remained close to each other, as if an exchange of words had been possible through our metal shells. I already no longer felt the heaviness of my clothes, of my shoes, from my air tank, nor the weight of this thick sphere in the middle of which my head was floating like an almond in its shell. All these objects immersed in the water lost part of their weight, equal to that of the displaced liquid, and I found myself very well of this physical law, recognized by Archimedes. I was no longer an inert mass, and I had no more freedom, relatively large movement. The light that illuminated the ground up to 30 feet below the surface of the ocean, Medina, by its power, the solar rays, easily crossed this aqueous mass and dissipated its coloration. I clearly distinguished the objects at a distance of 100 meters beyond the bottom, were nuanced by the fine degradations of the overseas. Then it blued in the distance and faded in the middle of a wave of darkness. Truly, this water that surrounded me was only a kind of air denser than the Earth's atmosphere, but almost also diaphanous. Above me, I glimpsed the calm surface of the sea. We walked on a fine, unwrinkled sand as that of the beaches that retain the footprint of the swell. This dazzling carpet, true reflector, repelled the rays of the sun with a surprising intensity of this immense reverberation. Molded would I believed if I affirm that at this depth of 30 feet, I saw, as in broad daylight, for a quarter of an hour, I was walking this burning sand, sown with impalpable shell dust. The hull of the Nautilus, drawn like a long pitfall, disappeared little by little, but its lantern, when the night would have been made, in the middle of the waters, should facilitate our return on board, by projecting its rays with a perfect clarity, difficult to understand, for who has seen only on earth these white layers so strongly charged? There the dust whose air is saturated gives them the appearance of a light fog, but on sea, as to subdue these electric features, are transmitted with incomparable purity. However, we always went, and the vast plain of sand seemed to be limitless. I spread out of the hand the liquid curtains that would close behind me, and fade my steps suddenly under the pressure of water. Soon, some forms of object, barely blurred in the distance, were drawn to my eyes. I recognized magnificent first shots of rock, lined with zoophyte of the most beautiful sample, and I was first struck with a special effect in this middle. It was then 10 a.m. The rays of the sun hit the surface of the waves at a rather oblique angle, and in contact with their light, decomposed by refraction as through a prism. Flowers, seedling, polyp shells, nuanced on their edge, of the 7 colors of the ground spectrum. It was a wonder, a feast of the eyes, that this entanglement of colored tone, a real kaleidoscopy of green, of orange, yellow, violet, indigo, of blue, in a word, the whole palette of a rabid colorist, that I could not communicate to the board. The rivalry sensations with the brain. He had admirable interjections that I did not know as captain. No, and his companion exchanged my thoughts, by means of agreed signs. So, for want of better, I spoke to myself. I was screaming in the copper box that topped my head, spending perhaps in vain words more air than it was appropriate in front of this splendid spectacle. Council had stopped, as I obviously, the worthy boy, in the presence of these samples of zoophyte, alone tufts of virgin oculin, formerly referred to as white coral. The fungi bristled in the form of fungi. The anemones, adhering by their muscular disc, figured a parterre of flowers enameled with porridge of their colorful tentacle of starfish, which constellated the sand, and astrophyton's verrucous fine lace, embroidered by the hand of the Naiades, whose scallops swayed to the weak undulations caused by our walk. It was a real sorrow for me to crush under my feet the brilliant specimens of mollusks which littered the ground by thousands, the concentric combs, the hammers, the donuses, the real shell leaping, the trochs, the red helmets, the strombies, garlic angel aphacy, and so many other products of this inexhaustible ocean. But it was necessary to walk, and we went forward while flying over our heads troops of taxes, leaving their tentacles of outremont floating in the train of a jellyfish whose opaline or tender pink umbrella festooned with a lagoon sunrays in Pelagus panopere that in the darkness would have sown our path of glow, phosphorescent. All these wonders I glimpsed them in the space of a quarter of a mile, barely stopping me, and following Captain Nemo, who reminded me with a gesture. Soon the nature of the soil changed to the plain of sand, succeeded a layer of viscous mud that the Americans call oaz, only composed of siliceous or limestone shell. Then we traveled a meadow of pelagic plant algae that the waters had not yet torn, and whose vegetation was fiery. These lawns with soft cloth at the foot had rivaled the most mellow carpet woven by the hand of men. But at the same time that the greenery spread under our feet did not abandon a light of our planet's marine, classified in this exuberant family of algae, of which we know more than 2,000 species, crossed on the surface of the waters. I saw floating long ribbon of Fucus globose, one another the other. Tubulated Laurensis cladisteph, with foliages so untied web redemencies, similar to fans of cactus. I observed that the green plants kept closer to the surface of the sea, while the reds occupied a medium depth, leaving to the black or brown hydrophytes the care of forming the gardens and the beds of the remote layers of the ocean. These algae are truly a prodigy of the creation, one of the wonders of the universal flora. This family produces both the smallest and the largest plants of the globe. Because we counted 4,000, because of these seedlings are capable of the same space of 5 millimeters. We had left the Nautilus since about 1.5. It was near noon. I noticed the perpendicularity of the solar rays, which were no longer refracted. The magic of colors disappeared little by little, and the shades of emerald and sapphire faded from our firmament. We walked with a regular step that reasoned on the ground with an astonishing intensity. The slightest noises were transmitted with a speed at which the ear is not accustomed. On the earth, indeed, the water is, for sound, a better vehicle than the air, and it spreads there with a quadruple speed. At this moment, the ground lowered by a steep slope. The light took a uniform hue. We reached a depth of 100 meters, but then underwent a pressure of 10 atmospheres. Scapfander's garment was established in such conditions that I did not suffer at all from this pressure. I only felt a certain discomfort to the joints of the fingers, and still malaise did not take long to disappear. As for the fatigue that should bring this walk of hour under an harnachement of which I was so little used, It was 0. My movements, aided by the water, occurred with a surprising ease. Arrived at this depth of 300 feet, I still perceived the rays of the sun, but weakly. To their intense brightness had succeeded a reddish twilight, medium term between day and night. However, we saw enough to lead us, and it was not yet necessary to put the Ruhmkorff devices in activity. At this moment, Captain Nemo stopped. He waited until I had joined him, and from the finger he showed me a few masses that were dark in the accuse's small distance. It is the forest of the island Crespo, thought, and I was not mistaken.